While the whole world was watching Trump having tea with Xi Jinping in Zhongnanhai, a place where almost no one is allowed, preparations for the next reception were already underway in Beijing. Just 4 days later, another plane landed, and this time it was Putin standing on the air stairs. Coincidence? Just a random occurrence? Or is this real geopolitics where as soon as one leaves, another is already on the rise? Today we'll break down what's happening inside probably the most important triangle in the modern world: Russia, China, and the USA. And we'll find out who's in charge of this triangle right now. The answer might surprise you. In the second part, there's a story that almost went unnoticed. Trump announced that he's canceling the strike on Iran that was planned for Tuesday. He said, "I was asked to wait." But hold on, he himself admitted that the strike was planned. That's the first thing. Second, Iran, in response, stated that it will now take control of the underwater internet cables. Well, that's already a different war. And third, Trump personally allowed Chinese tankers with Iranian oil to pass through Hormuz, and he explained why. We'll talk about that in the second part. But first, let's start with Beijing. Because without understanding what happened between Xi, Trump, and, well, Putin, yes, in just 1 week, the second story simply won't make sense. You won't understand why Iran is acting the way it is, why Trump is postponing the strike, why this, let's call it, triangle, yes, Russia, China, USA, determines all the other triangles on planet Earth today. So first the triangle, and then Hormuz cables and tankers, so Russia, China, USA. I put Russia first, not at all, because it's the most important in this. Well, let's call it a triangle again, yes? How did it happen that two leaders came to Beijing just 4 days apart? Let's start with what seems obvious but actually needs some explanation. Trump was in Beijing on May 13th and 15th. Putin was in Beijing on May 19th and 20th, 4 days apart. The newspapers wrote that Xi is receiving two global crises back-to-back. Political commentators began to speculate that China is deliberately arranging this order. First the West, then the East. Balancing, mechanological, multi-vector approach. Beautiful, but as we say here, there's a word for it: bullshit. Well, translated into Russian, yeah, that's just nonsense. Let's look at the facts. Putin's visit was planned. When? In February. Immediately after the video call between Xi and Putin, presidential advisor Yuri Ushakov confirmed the dates that had been agreed upon in advance. There is no connection with Trump's visit. Trump, in turn, was supposed to fly to Beijing, I think at the end of March or the beginning of April. He postponed the visit. Why? And Ushakov, the same Ushakov, himself said it was because of the whole Iran saga. Those are his words. War with Iran. It started on February 28 and completely reshuffled, so to speak, the entire diplomatic calendar. When the cannons speak, there's no need to fly on airplanes. So here's what happened. Trump arrived later than he planned, and Putin arrived on time. How could it be otherwise? That's the whole strategy. Reality is much more prosaic than it usually seems from the outside. But what came out of it in the end is anything but prosaic. Because Xi Jinping found himself in a unique situation. In 1 week, he received the leaders of two powers that are in conflict with third countries, and both of these powers, both China and Russia, need China. Yes, both the US and Russia need China. And both know that the other is also flying, will be in Beijing, and both are watching what Xi promised him. For Putin, it was vitally important to find something out. This is where what you might call a real conversation begins. Putin came to Beijing with a whole series of questions. One of them is key, which you could, well, put in a straightforward way. What if he switched sides? Brother 2. It sounds harsh, but that's exactly what's behind all this diplomatic rhetorical explosion. This outpouring about the unprecedented level of relations and truly limitless partnership. Well, really, limitless. Putin needed to make sure that the warming between Beijing and Washington is tactical, not strategic. That China has not made a decision to reorient itself. God forbid towards the West. that the strategic triangle in which Russia and China are closer to each other than either of them is to the US remains in force. For this, he needed answers to specific questions. Several key points. Well, the first one is Ukraine. Putin needed to know precisely what Trump told Xi regarding Ukraine. What are the real American conditions? Because, well, Putin definitely wanted to know exactly where our red line is when it comes to Ukraine. Trump is not a very predictable negotiator. His public positions often differ greatly from what he actually wants. And Xi was in direct contact with Trump, literally just 3 days ago, first-hand intel. Putin wanted to know what Washington was actually willing to accept as an outcome of the war. Is there pressure on Kyiv? Is there no pressure on Kyiv? How serious is it? Is it serious? Is it real? Or is it just for the press and so on? The second thing is sanctions and economic pressure. The U.S. has long been demanding that China stop supplying dual-use technologies to Moscow, that is, components that end up in Russian missiles and drones. They can supposedly be for civilian use, well, in both cases. NATO has officially called China a key accomplice. Well, that is, an accomplice to aggression, an accomplice to war, and so on and so forth. I mean, the war in Ukraine. Putin needed to know, did Trump put pressure on Xi about this issue, and if he did, what did Xi respond? This is not an abstract question for Russia. The question is whether parts will continue to flow into Russia, without which it becomes harder and harder to wage war. Third, energy. Here, everything is specific. The power of Siberia. 2 gas pipeline. The deal for additional oil supplies. Russian oil already makes up a significant part of China's imports, an increase of 35% just in the first quarter of 2026. But the key question is, power of Siberia too is still up in the air. China is in no hurry. This is a pipeline that will tie Russia and China together for good. Beijing understands, the longer they wait, the better the terms. Putin needs progress, at least symbolic progress. Next is Iran. Here, Putin found himself in a delicate position. Iran is an ally of Moscow. For years, Russia has been receiving drones from Iran. It supported Iran diplomatically. It participated in multilateral negotiations on the nuclear program. But now the Iranian crisis has closed the Strait of Hormuz, and China is losing oil supplies. This creates tension. It's not friction, but tension within the triangle. Putin needed to understand how far Beijing had gone in its agreements with Trump on Iran. Is China selling out its allies for a trade deal? Well, so what has changed and what hasn't? This is where, as they say, things get interesting. Nothing has changed in Russia. China is not going to abandon its strategic partnership with Russia. There are several obvious reasons for this. Russia is the largest supplier of oil, gas, and, by the way, nuclear technologies. Russia is also a buffer on China's northwest flank. Russia is an ally in shaping the narrative. There's the idea of a multipolar world. By the way, that's something Trump is supporting right now. Maybe in a slightly different form than how China sees it, but he supports it. Beijing is promoting it as an alternative to American hegemony, and Trump himself says, we don't want to be all over the world anymore, so it's not very clear here. What's the point of fighting if the other side says, we're doing this anyway? So the joint declaration that Xi and Putin are signing these days is exactly about this multipolar world. They could have easily signed it with Trump as well. A new type of international relations. Okay, by the way, these aren't just words for them. This is a political manifesto against what they call the American-centric system. And the system is fading away because of the sanctions. Also, apparently, nothing has fundamentally changed. Trump pressured Xi in Beijing, demanding that he stop supplying dual-use technologies to Russia. Publicly, Xi did not make any binding decisions. Publicly, Xi didn't say anything like that. But that doesn't mean everything stayed the same. Beijing may quietly adjust certain supplies so as, let's say, not to irritate Washington too much. But there won't be a strategic shift. But regarding Iran, from my point of view, something important happened here. A detail that basically changes the picture. From my point of view, we should remember this moment because it's a key one. For the first time during the entire Iranian crisis, China publicly agreed with two things that the Americans had been saying all along. First, Iran should not have nuclear weapons. That's quite a statement, right? Yes, that is practically everything. Everything that America has done over the past 30 years has been based on this. Iran must not obtain nuclear weapons. Well, and the second point, America has always said this too. The Strait of Hormuz must remain open. Both points appeared in the official U.S. document issued after the Trump and Xi summit. The Chinese side doesn't do things like that. But usually when it doesn't like something or thinks something isn't quite right, it issues a rebuttal. And the Chinese side didn't refute anything. So de facto in diplomacy, this means silent consent. At the same time, in reality, Xi did say, maybe not in the exact wording the Americans used, but he basically said the same thing. This doesn't mean that China will betray or is betraying Iran. Beijing still buys Iranian oil. It still protects Tehran diplomatically. But for the first time, there was a signal. China is ready to gently push Iran toward compromise, quietly without public statements. But to push, why? Because closing Hormuz hurts China itself. First and foremost, it hurts China. A fifth of the world's oil exports, as we said, went through this strait. Chinese tankers are stuck. Iranian oil isn't coming through. This is the economic pain that Beijing experiences every day. For now, they can still replace it with what they have in reserves and so on. That's why China's position on Iran is slowly and cautiously shifting. Like, well, guys, you played around, threw things at each other, stones, bombs, whatever, and that's enough. It's time to negotiate. Well, and the most important shift, the most important shift. America is no longer an enemy. And here is the most important observation out of everything that happened this week. China, it seems, has started to look at America differently, not as an enemy. Not as an adversary that needs to be defeated, but as a rival, a competitor. In a sense, well, I don't know, maybe not a partner, but a fellow player in the big game. That's a fundamentally different category. An enemy is someone you have to destroy. An adversary is someone you're at war with. And a rival is someone you compete with. Well, according to the rules. Someone you can negotiate with. Someone you can divide markets with. Spheres of influence. It's a completely different way of operating. What indicates this shift? What makes me say that, right? A few things. First, the wording that Xi used at the meeting with Trump. The U.S. and China have the most important bilateral relationship in the world. We should be partners, not rivals. That is, we should move from being rivals to being partners. Not from enemies, not from adversaries. From rivals, we should strive to become partners. Gentlemen, these are not just nice words for the camera. This is a signal within the internal Chinese system. We are changing our relationship. By changing the rhetoric, we are changing our relationship. Secondly, trade agreements. Boeing received an order for 200 airplanes. China committed to buying American grain for, well, $17 billion a year until 1928. Xi accepted the invitation to visit Washington in the fall. Well, as I understand it, this was agreed upon even before Trump's arrival, but officially we heard that he will come in the fall at that time, a visit. These are not gestures. This is what is called the framework of relations. Thirdly, this is probably the most telling. Trump did not give binding commitments on arms supplies to Taiwan. That is, everyone noticed this, not just Taiwan. So CNN immediately called it a victory for China, a decisive victory for China. But their main goal is to defeat Trump, and that's it. Everything else can go to hell. Even if the world blows up to smithereens, let everyone die, including themselves, their children. The main thing is for Trump to suffer. This means that Washington, in exchange for cooperation on Iran and trade deals, is quietly backing down on Taiwan, not betraying. But they are backing down. Not publicly, not officially, but they are backing down. For China, just so you understand, this is not just a diplomatic success. It's confirmation of a new strategy. With America, it's more profitable to negotiate than to fight. It's more profitable to compete than to confront. This is where he should go back to Obama's approach, because that's what Obama once offered to Russia. Come on, guys, let's cooperate. Let's compete in some areas, but let's, so to speak, be together. And then you'll get much more than if you just got something else. It's just that Putin was the wrong partner for this. His way of getting his billions, I don't know, maybe hundreds of billions, dozens of billions. It doesn't matter. He's nothing like a Westerner. So he wasn't interested in that at all. I mean, neither he nor his buddies. Sometimes they're called the O0 Cooperative. But of course, it's broader than just the O0 Cooperative. This means the following. Russia remains an important partner for China, but the leverage is gradually shifting. Previously, China needed Russia as a counterbalance to American pressure. Now, if the pressure is decreasing, if Washington and Beijing reach some agreements, Russia becomes less indispensable, right? Needed, not unnecessary, right? I mean, but less indispensable. That's exactly why Putin came to Beijing with such a large, as they say, entourage, right? 5 deputy prime ministers, several ministers, representatives of big business. He wants to secure as many concrete agreements as possible: pipeline, oil, investments, technology. For now, China still, let's say, seriously needs Russia, because economic reality is like a blow to the head in Russia. Russia's GDP growth in 2026 is expected to be 0.4%. Well, 0.4%. Let's translate that into our language, in plain American English. Guys, that's stagnation. Ukraine is hitting the oil infrastructure. Export terminals are under threat. Western sanctions are still having an impact. In these conditions, China is not just an ally. China is manna from heaven. It's economic oxygen. It's like a godsend. And oxygen means power. And both sides understand this perfectly. So what do we have here? China's position on Russia hasn't changed. The partnership remains. On Ukraine, there's a cautious shift toward putting pressure on Tehran. Regarding America, there's a change in category from enemy to rival. This isn't a reversal, but an evolution. The direct opposite of the word revolution. Slow, calculated. It's solely in China's interests. China first for them, and for us, America first. It's all fine. Putin understands this. That's exactly why he's here with his team, so to speak. To manage to secure as much as possible before the balance shifts even further against him. And now, as promised, the second story about tankers, cables, and the canceled strike. Let's call this story the strike that didn't happen. Let's start with something that almost went unnoticed amid the news. Iran made a statement about the canceled strike, which under normal circumstances would have caused a flurry of publications. Tehran announced that it is considering the possibility of taking control over underwater internet cables, passing through the waters in the area of the Strait of Hormuz, international waters. These are not just words. There are cables passing through this area that provide internet connectivity, I think, for a whole range of Middle Eastern countries, South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Africa. Yeah, so like only 1 out of 100, 1% of the world's information flow passes through there. Can you imagine? 1%. Damage or interception of these cables. This is no longer an oil war. This is already an infrastructure war. It's an attack on banking transactions, on data transmission, on communications, on everything. How should we treat this? Well, as a signal, not as a plan. Iran is showing we have cards that we haven't played yet. This is psychological pressure meant to show, to seem further up the escalation ladder than you think. We're still beating our chest like Tarzan. To carry out this threat immediately, Tehran most likely will not do it. The consequences are too high, because it's almost impossible to imagine how the world would react to this, right? Including for Iran itself, the consequences. But the threat can't be ignored either. It's a new element of pressure in an already complicated game. And now the main thing. Was the planned strike real, or is this another bluff by Trump? And the answer seems to be this. The strike was genuinely planned. This is not an interpretation. Trump's words and some of the actions that took place. On Monday evening, May 18, Trump wrote on Truth Social, "The military has been ordered not to carry out the planned strike on Iran tomorrow." Actually, that's a fact. The phrase "planned strike tomorrow" means one thing. The strike was planned. Otherwise, half the army would now be sitting and explaining to their wives that nothing like that was happening. Before this post, there were no public signs of the operation being prepared. But with Trump, that's typical. No signals in advance. That means it's happening. Hegseth, the Minister of War, he's seriously called that on this day, went to a political event in Kentucky. And we often do this so that, as they say, the enemy has something to think about. Since he left, nothing like that is happening. Outwardly, all is calm, and inside there are military vehicles. Everything is ready. All that's left is to pull the trigger. Trump himself called what was planned a very large strike, right? But why is it possible to strike now? Why? Against oil facilities, against military infrastructure? There's very little of that left already, right? The goal, from my point of view, was primarily economic. Now it's already pressure. Not the destruction of Iran. To inflict such damage that would force Iran to bring everyone to the negotiating table on American terms. Of course, there's a problem here, because those guys who are sitting in those caves, in those rooms, underground cities as they call them, it's quite possible that they're perfectly fine living there, because there's plenty of food, so to speak. Maybe they've brought in women. Who knows? They've brought them in large numbers. There's plenty of weapons, plenty of light. You stick your head out, you shoot all the time. You hide back again. Well, the only thing is they don't get drunk, because Muslims, when they're together, don't drink. When they're alone, they quietly have a drink. But actually, when they're together, they pretend that they don't drink. Why was it canceled? The official version is this. Trump wrote, 3 allies asked me, so who are they? The Emir of Qatar, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and I think the President of the Emirates. They said, wait 2 or 3 days. I don't remember the exact wording. It was something like 2 or 3 days. Wait a little. We're close to a deal. Trump replied, well, all right, I'll wait. And he added, if we can solve this without bombing them to hell, I'll be very glad. And he ordered the military to remain at full combat readiness in case an acceptable deal was not reached. Bomb them to hell. Iranian state television, of course, immediately reported that the retreat was driven by fear. Well, of course, we're very afraid of them. We're very afraid of them, but let's be honest. The official version isn't the whole story. I mean, we're already used to the fact that politicians don't always tell the whole truth. Trump is a negotiator with a specific tactic, actually. It's well documented. Deadline, then a postponement, then setting it again. Another deadline, another postponement. Then it gets softened, then he threatens again. This isn't chaos. It's a method, a methodology. The goal is to wear out the opponent, to keep him under constant pressure, to deprive him of the ability to plan, so he doesn't know what to expect. But here's what's important to note. At the very beginning of the war with Iran, Trump did exactly the same thing. He spent a long time signaling that he was ready for talks. He hinted at a pause, and then he launched strikes on February 28, and he did it when he was ready. Not when another deadline had passed, but right in the middle, when the military machine was fully ready for combat. And here is the key point. Delaying doesn't always mean weakness or indecisiveness. Delaying can also mean, we're just not ready yet, guys. We're simply not ready. We said we would be, but we're not ready. We need more time to transfer, to reposition, to coordinate with Israel, to set the objectives, to make sure everything is reliable, dependable, requests from our allies in the Gulf. It's a very convenient reason to take a pause without losing face, not to say, oops, we're not ready. I'm being strongly urged not to strike yet, which is why the current strike cancellation is viewed in 2 ways. Yes, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates asked to wait. Yes, negotiations are ongoing, but it's quite possible that the strike is also being postponed because they weren't fully prepared for it. And when they're ready, they'll strike, at that very moment, As soon as they're ready, they'll strike. But they don't care about what was said 24 hours ago or 2 hours ago, as has happened before. There's another factor that is talked about less than it should be. Neither Trump nor his allies in the region want to bomb Iran's oil infrastructure. Not at all. Oil fields, refineries, and export terminals are facilities that take years to restore. A strike on them means a sharp jump in global oil prices. This hits the American economy, the Saudi economy, and the entire world market. This is exactly the situation when victory comes at a price on the market as well. Sometimes it's more expensive than defeat, a Pyrrhic victory. That's why the military logic in the current war is this: to put pressure, but not to destroy. Block, but not destroy. Keep them on the edge, but don't push them over it. Trump understands this. His allies in the Gulf understand this. Well, even Israel, despite all its desire to put pressure, understands this. And finally, there's a story that needs to be understood correctly. At the height of the crisis, right before the visit to Beijing, Trump let 3 Chinese tankers carrying a huge amount of Iranian oil pass through Hormuz. He explained this himself publicly in an interview with Fox News, saying, "Well, we let them pass, we allowed them to go through." The message was sent to several recipients at once, to China. "We can give you oil, or we can pressure you with oil. If you take steps toward us, we'll ease the pressure. This isn't a blockade, it's a valve. You know, a valve. You can open it, you can close it. You can open it, you can close it." To Iran, "We control the strait. We decide what goes through and what doesn't. Your permission is an illusion, our permission is real." And of course, this is also for the domestic audience. We have elections coming up. We're not just fighting, we're managing the situation. When concessions are made to us, we reciprocate. Because Trump is a negotiator, he's not a destroyer. Well, he's not a destroyer. The question everyone is asking, all the time, it's this: well, how will it end? How will it end? The structural situation looks like this. The U.S. and Iran are stuck in a military-economic stalemate. Yes, do you know what a stalemate is? The American blockade, the Iranian counter-blockade, mutual strikes, mutual statements about a ceasefire. The truce of April 8 is technically in effect, but both sides are violating it. Iran has put forward a revised, as they say, 14-point plan. It was delivered through Pakistan. The key demands from Iran: you lift the sanctions. That means we keep control over Hormuz. Israel stops its operations in Lebanon. And we say, complete renunciation of nuclear weapons, opening of the strait, room for compromise. It must be, because there and so on. But it's rather narrow at the moment, and the most likely scenario is approximately as follows, I think. A package deal through intermediaries. There, well, Qatar, Pakistan, I don't know which of them. With quiet pressure from China on Tehran. We have just ensured this. A closed Hormuz costs Beijing money every day. In exchange for help in managing the situation, China has already received concessions on Taiwan and trade deals with Washington. I'll add one more thing that, for some reason I don't understand, no one has paid any attention to at all. We're leaving Africa. I've already talked about this several times. I think I mentioned it a bit yesterday or the day before. But we'll talk more about it. We're leaving Africa. And we also mentioned this in Beijing. It's a slow process. It's painful, with provocations, with canceled strikes, with threats to the cables. But the direction is towards a deal, because no one, not the US, not Iran, not China, nor do Western countries want a complete collapse of the regional energy infrastructure, whether it's Iran or any other country there, like Qatar. I don't know, and that's what needs to be understood. Behind all this chaos, behind the postponed visits, the canceled strikes, the threats to the cables, the bargaining over tankers. Gentlemen, normal human diplomatic work is going on. Slow, annoying. Back and forth, in circles, we came back. But it keeps going, keeps going. Trump, actually. Not a warrior. He doesn't want war. He's a businessman. Let's make a deal, guys. China absolutely doesn't want any collapse. And who will they sell their goods to if there's a collapse? China wants stability. China makes money from us. It produces things and sells them to us. We buy it. We then borrow money from China at interest. It's a great setup for China. Why would it want to change anything? Iran? The Iranian government, they don't want destruction. They want to survive, and they want recognition. Recognition. Even Putin, for all his adventurism, wants one thing. Not to be left alone. Right now, everyone wants something different. No one wants a disaster. There's a chance that a disaster won't happen. It's not a guarantee. But that's, well, as they say in diplomatic language, it's grounds for cautious optimism. I never understood those words, and now I'm saying them myself. The world now is like a chessboard where several players are making moves at the same time. Not just two from opposite sides, but everyone is moving at once. It's nerve-wracking. It's not very predictable. But still, ladies and gentlemen, it's chess. And as long as they're playing chess, they're not destroying each other. It's not a war of annihilation yet. Let them play. If you're interested in discussing topics like this together, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. We release videos regularly, and every episode is an attempt to understand not only what happened, but also why. Well, and of course, what you can get out of it, like if you agree, and write in the comments if you disagree. Please, go ahead. I answer honestly. It's more important for us to play chess than to say to each other, you're this or that, right? Bald, big-eared, wearing ties, right? And one last thing. By the way, thank you very much for the compliments about my ties. They're not for me. The compliments go to my wife, and that's even more pleasant. We have a paid tier. It's $4 a month. This gives you early access to episodes and extended breakdowns. Sometimes there are materials that for some reason don't get released publicly. The link is below the video. Thank you for watching. See you next time.